James is trying to say to you and I that every trial is a temptation. It is not some dichotomy of some things being a temptation and other things not being a temptation. The reason he offers his metaphor around rich and poor is because he's trying to get at a kind of sameness that all of us have to encounter when we understand how we are being tested. You see, trials and temptations in this text are actually the same thing. And for you and I, any change in your existence is always going to be a temptation. You think that you're only being tested or tempted when something wrong happens. I'm trying to say to you that you are being tempted when you are complimented and when you are being criticized. I'm saying that you are tempted when you have to encounter adversity or prosperity. I'm saying that you are tempted when you find love and when you lose love. I'm saying that you are tempted when you get money or you lose money. I'm saying that praise is a way of tempting you. And I'm saying that criticism is a way of tempting you. Because no matter whether it's positive or negative, it affects your present state. And how you respond to either praise or criticism becomes a temptation. See, you think that your heart, when somebody compliments you, doesn't respond to that. But if you don't know your heart, you won't realize that a compliment sends you into pride and arrogance. Because you can't see that about yourself. You think that you're only tempted when negative things happen. But the reality is that when good things happen to you as well, that's still a test. You see, when you're rich, you can assume that luxuries are necessities and lose sight of the reality of who God wants to be as center and source. When you are poor, you can allow adversity to make you bitter, unapproachable. So it doesn't matter whether you encounter good things or bad things. Every trial is a temptation. And everything you encounter is going to make you either better than you were or worse than you were. Whether it's good or whether it's... Am I making sense to anybody? See, that's what James is trying to get them to understand. That it's not just the bad things that happen to you that test where your heart is. It's the good things too. And what James is saying is, no matter what happens to you in your life, here's the walk-away reality. You are never the same. The one constant for every single one of us is that no matter what happens to us, it is impossible to stay the same. Any change in your existence creates a temptation. See, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, how do you respond not just to bad things, but how do you respond to the good things? Because our hearts are so jacked up. And I want to be careful. I want to move slowly because I want you to get this. Every single trial is a temptation. Now, what James goes further to say in the text is, he walks us through this thing. He says, listen, inside verses 13, and remember when you are being tempted, don't say God is tempting you. God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone else. He says temptation comes from our own desires. And I don't have time to help you see why James is using sexual metaphors. Because he understands that the issues of our heart, when you leave God, it's called adultery, but the reality is he's pointing to idolatry. He says that when you're tempted, it comes from our desires, B-side 14, which entice us and drag us away. He says these desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death, because all sin has grandchildren. So what he says is that the cause, the cause for you and I, the cause of your sin is never the occasion. It's not the occasion that causes you to sin. It's something on the inside of you. And sometimes we get cause and occasion confused. And what the heart will do is the heart will only and always do what it wants to do. See, you say, my boss told me that if I don't lie, I will lose my job. And I didn't want to lie, I had to do it. No, that's not true. You lie because you want the job. More than you want the truth. And you will always gravitate and do what you want. And if you had wanted the truth more than your job, you would not have lied. So you can't say that the boss caused me to lie. You have to say there's something on the inside of me. See, that's why you need Jesus. Because the work that needs to be done on us is an inside job. And there's nothing on the outside that can fix us. Our transformation is not externally derived, it's internally driven. And the only way that I can get help is when I begin to admit that the problem is me on the inside. It's not the people around me, because people can't make you mad. You just mad. And the problem is your source is jacked up. Oh, I wish I had. It is never the occasion that is the cause of what we do.
That's right. That's right.
We do it because we want to do it.
That's right. That's right.
I'll give you another illustration. I talked about this before. I like to fish. And I like to boast about when I fish. Arnold, walk with me here. Because when I catch a big striper, I'll steal yours. We were fishing one time, and John caught a great big striper, huge striper, but he didn't want to pick it up. So I said, let me show you how to pick it up. And then I told John, get the camera ready. And I took his fish. And they took the picture. And when I showed the picture, people think it's my fish. But it was his fish. When you catch fish, you like to think that you caught them on the basis of your skill. But I've been on too many boats where we had changed bait 4 or 5 times. And according to the monitor, the fish were there. But we still couldn't catch them. Because you don't catch fish on the basis of the fisherman's skill. You catch fish on the basis of the fish's desire. If the fish has no desire for your bait, it it doesn't matter what you put in front of the fish. You can't catch the fish. The same thing is true for us. We get caught on our desire. It's never the occasion that's the cause. It's the fact that there's something on the inside of us. Because if I don't desire it, you can't catch me with it. That's why what you got to say is, God, I need you to fix my desires. Because when my desires are jacked up, I get caught in stuff I got no business being caught up in. I get hooked. And it could be anger, it could be sex, it could be food, it could be pride, it could be whatever. The issue is my desire keeps getting me caught. And I need somebody to do something that can fix my desires. This is why you can't blame anybody else. You can't say that it's your husband's fault or your wife's fault or your kid's fault or your boss's fault. It is never somebody else's fault. Some of you all have finals coming up if you're in school as you move towards May and June. And what you realize is that you got to walk into a classroom and you got to take a test. There'll be a number of students who walk out of those classrooms and they will have failed. And they will want to blame the teacher. It is not the test. The test was the occasion to reveal what was in you. You can't fail it and blame the test. You fail it and you got to look at yourself. Because James says the cause of my sin, he says, you know what? It's never going to be the occasion. He says there's something on the inside of me that has gotten me caught. Now let me tell you why I think this is liberating and I'm on hustle. Because I think at some point, as I work through this fight of temptation, I got to recognize that I am not an animal. I still have volition. I can make choices. See, what I don't like about the way the world works is that the world tries to relegate you and I to some lower species of animalistic behavior that says, I don't have the ability to do anything on my own. I'm predisposed. And I would argue that, well, wait a minute, this is liberating because it reminds me of my need and my dependency on someone named Jesus. Because if I will but acknowledge the truth that James teaches, in the tradition I grew up in, they said, just ask the Savior to help you. He will carry you through. And until you acknowledge, the tension for most of us is this refusal to acknowledge the truth of the text and pretend that we are able to save ourselves. And until you become completely non-dependent on whatever you've been turning to make you feel better, you have the wrong source driving your life. See, here's why when a person is self-centered, self-focused, they can never hear the call of Jesus to self-denial. Because self-denial becomes obnoxious and ridiculous when I'm self-focused. So the focus on yourself prevents you from hearing the message, the call of Christ to self-denial, because you believe you deserve something. And you want to satisfy the appetite that you think because you deserve it. So self-denial is always incompatible to self-focus. That's why James says, consider. That's why I had you pause. He says, consider it all joy. Not that it's a good thing or I'm happy. James says, wait a minute, there's a state of being that has nothing to do with your emotion, which is why I said consider, because I want you to think about where you are in your circumstance, why you're in that circumstance, and how you can get out of the circumstance, not by feeling, but by thinking. Consider it, better translation, pure joy. A kind of joy that's a part of a state of being, not an emotion. Because there's got to come a time in your life, and there's got to come a time in my life, when what we discover is another way to think about our situation, not feel about our situation. See, if you let your feelings govern you all the time about your situations, you'll never be able to see exactly who God is and how God can deliver. So James says, consider it. Why? Because I want you to recognize that joy is a state of being, not an emotion. And when you are in your circumstance, when you're in your situation, I need you to be able to see it in this manner, which really tells me that I need to be a thinking Christian and a feeling Christian. And I want to offer this. Christians ain't supposed to be walking around smiling all the time. When he says consider it all joy, he ain't talking about always being smiling when you're going through stuff. He says consider it. I want you to think about it. Because I want you to recognize joy as something outside of an emotion. I want you to see joy as a state of being. So when I think of the goodness of Jesus and all that he's done for me, it changes how I see even my situation. But here's what he's going after. James is trying to get them to move out of this place where they are looking at something other than him as the epicenter of their existence. In other words, the word he uses in the Greek text, he has to do with a source, a center. I want you looking at something other than yourself, not negating yourself. I need you to see something. You see, you can fight temptation all you want by trying to just say no. There's a story about a guy, Ulysses, who's going through the sirens. This is part of Greek tragedy. And he says, I want y'all to tie me to the mast as the sirens call for me. Tie me to the mast. And no matter what I say to you, don't let me loose. And I'm not sure that's the best way to do it, but that might be one way to do it. In fact, I think it's a pretty good way to do it. That would keep you from some things. But all it would do was mess with your actions. It wouldn't change your attitude. And what you need is a change, not in action. You need to change an attitude, because that attitude is derived from what you see as your source. Because the real problem with sin is not your desire to do bad things. It's that you want things too badly. It's not your desire to do bad things. It's that there are some things you want so badly they replace God. Which is why sometimes God has got to take the career. Or people you love. Or a position. Because it's not that you want bad things, it's just that you want something too badly. You don't have the right source. And he says, I have to be your source. See, if you look at your job and say, well, the job makes me feel, got the wrong source. If you look at your house and you say, well, the house makes me feel, you got the wrong house, wrong source. If you look at a person that says, well, they make me feel, whatever it is that makes you feel better, that makes you feel good, that makes you feel significant. Jesus says, no, that's the wrong source. And the only way to move from temptation is not by saying no. You have to find something that you think is beautiful. Let me put it to you the way Chalmers puts it. When the soul has been held captive by something beautiful, the only thing that frees it is the view of something more beautiful. That's why saying no will never work. Because you've got to find something that looks better than what it is you've got, that takes up all of your focus, that you can love more than what you're holding on to. You see, the dog that has a bone in his mouth goes to the lake and sees a reflection of another thing. And the bigger bone that's the reflection in the lake is why he drops the bone that's in his mouth. Because unless you see something you prefer more, you will never let go of what you're holding on to. You can say no all you want, but what you need is a view of Jesus that becomes the expression of beauty and desire that causes you to drop what you've got. And just saying no will never work. That's why we preach to reveal a beautiful Savior, to show you someone who is so worthy of admiration, so worthy of your allegiance, so worthy of your love, that when you're done, you see Jesus as more desirable than anything. And that's the only way you can fight temptation. It's also the only way you can win. I said this at the men's breakfast yesterday, and I'm done with this. When the Apostle Paul is writing Romans chapter 7, he's trying to get you to see something about this struggle. And what Paul is trying to get at is something we all know very well. That is, in each one of us, there's another person. I don't care how saved you are. I don't care how saved you think you are. You're two people. You are the sum total, the composite of Jekyll and Hyde. You remember Jekyll and Hyde? He was tortured by wanting to be either all evil or all good because he couldn't stand being both. And that's the problem with every one of us. In every bad person, there's a little good. In every good person, there's a little bad. And Paul is struggling with this in Romans chapter 7. That's why it says, oh, wretched man that I am. He says, the good that I would do, I don't do. He says, the evil I don't want to do, that's what I do. He says, who can deliver me from this bondage? Because he realizes that he's caught in this duality. And I could almost understand it if I wrote Romans 7. I could almost understand it if you wrote Romans 7. But what bothers me is that Paul wrote Romans 7. Saint Paul, the Apostle Paul. Wait a minute, Paul, not you too. Paul, you say you're unspiritual? Sold to sin? No, I can understand that if anybody else had said that other than Paul. But Paul says, I found out something. I found there's a law that's at work in me. He said, but I found out something else. He said, there's another law. He says, when I came to Jesus, he said, I could tell you who I was before Christ. He says, and before Christ, I was engaged in a battle that I could not win. He says, but when I came to Jesus, I was still engaged in a battle. Come on, stay with me for a minute. The Christian life is not a transition from warfare to instant peace. Because when you are saved, you still got to struggle with some things. The difference is that before Christ, I was engaged in a battle that I could not win. But now that I know Christ, I'm engaged in a battle that I cannot lose. Because of him, I keep struggling, I keep fighting, because I will win. That's the difference he makes.